I am so sorry, everyone. I don't know what's went wrong here. I really don't. Yeah, I truly am sorry. I don't know what. Rejoice, comrades. Some random geek is lurking in the void. Watch out for the tardigrades. I really don't know what's went wrong here. I thought I was over this.
Right, so despite moves to censure Israel, the declaration of Israel as a national security threat, and the joint venture with Sweden to see the EU-Israel trade agreement suspended, the Dutch government was already on borrowed time, having effectively collapsed a couple of months ago. So the acceleration of that we're seeing now with the departure of another of their coalition parties, ostensibly because the Dutch government won't impose sanctions on Israel, is actually the latter half of a much bigger story. Dutch politics had already reached a moment of profound instability, that unstable government already due to end come this October with snap elections, deciding to lose another party rather than take an anti-Israel stance for once. It all makes for a nation that has had such positive headlines in taking Israel to task, still having a government that has chosen Israel as their hill to die on, fatally wounded as they were already anyway. The cabinet led by Prime Minister Dick Schoof was already faltering when Geert Wilders' Party for Freedom, the PVV, withdrew from government back in June, shattering what had been a fragile coalition. Yet the asylum dispute that precipitated Wilders' departure, the Dutch answer to Nigel Farage as he is, was only the beginning. What ultimately pushed the government into a deeper crisis was not migration, but foreign policy, specifically its refusal to sanction Israel as famine spread in Gaza and international courts and investigated charges of genocide. The resignation of Foreign Minister Casper Veldkamp on the 22nd of August and the withdrawal of the entire New Social Contract Party following in his wake marked the decisive rupture. Although the government was already functioning in a caretaker capacity after Wilders' exit, this new wave of resignation stripped it of any moral or political legitimacy. The Netherlands now moves towards these October elections under the leadership of a two-party rump cabinet reduced to absolute paralysis, and it's entirely of their own doing. Right, so the origins of the present crisis lie in the formation of the Schoof cabinet.
The area that I can see is like that. It's not expanded out. I don't know what's went wrong with it. Sorry the video's so small. Rejoice, comrades. Jim Speaker's here. Hi, Jim. I cannot see the chat on my laptop screen. It's too fucking small. I can't read it. So I'm seeing you on my screen manager on my phone. Has Helena finished now? I was trying to get it set up to see if you wanted to braid me. Oh, someone's in. Hello, James. Oh, it's John the Brazen. Give me a second. I'll bring up my YouTube feed. How does it look to everyone here? Because it looks really fucking odd. I do not know what has happened. This happens sometimes when I go live. It's reduced down in size for reasons. Yeah, not laptop. It shouldn't. I don't know how to change that over. I managed it the last time. Let's see. Um, Carry on,
after the
Damo.
2023 general election. Dick Schoof, great name, a career civil servant and intelligence official, was selected as a compromise prime minister because he was seen as a neutral technocrat who could command respect across the political spectrum. Yeah, they called that one wrong. Yet the coalition he was asked to lead was structurally contradictory from the outset. Doomed from the outset, you might say. On one side stood Geert Wilders and the PVV, having emerged.
That is an interesting looking person. Are they right wingers? I don't know much about Dutch politics. Sorry, my Dutch comrades. I should check your government out more often.
Emerged as the largest single party in the election, to Dutch shame, I'd dare say. Wilders has claimed that the right to shape government policy. His entire political career had been built on anti-Muslim rhetoric and his framing of Israel as a frontline state in the civilizational struggle between the West and Islam. For Wilders, Israel was not merely a foreign ally, but a symbolic extension of his domestic agenda. His party demanded unconditional support for Israel, rejecting any criticism of its military actions in Gaza. On another side were the VVD and the BBB, representing the mainstream right and agrarian populism respectively. These parties did not share Wilders' ideological zeal for Israel, but they were equally reluctant to act against it, fence-sitters as they largely are. Prime Minister Schoof, hailing from the VVD himself, articulated a position that the Netherlands would not act unilaterally, but would only move within the framework of European Union consensus. So that'll be moving not very much at all then, because EU foreign policy requires unanimity, and because member states such as Germany and Austria and Hungary consistently blocked sanctions on Israel, this amounted to a declared policy of permanent inaction. By insisting on waiting for Brussels, Schoof ensured that no action would ever be taken, effectively keeping Wilders on side in that respect. But the third side of the coalition triangle was the NSC, the party created by Peter Omtzigt after the childcare benefits scandal. NSC was born with a reformist and moralistic ethos committed to transparency, integrity, and the rule of law. In relation to Gaza, it positioned itself as the conscience of the coalition, calling for stronger measures against Israel, and at least the consideration of sanctions. Its foreign minister, Casper Veldkamp, embodied this approach. What united these three forces was, frankly, only the arithmetic of power. The numbers added up nicely if they got their heads together. Without PVV, a coalition would lack democratic legitimacy. They were the largest party despite being the far right. Without VVD and BBB, it would lack institutional stability. Without NSC, it would lack a reformist face. Yet in terms of substance, they were utterly irreconcilable. On Israel, one side demanded unconditional support, another side demanded accountability, and a third side chose fence-sitting, paralysis. As long as Israel's war on Gaza remained background noise, this impossible triangle could therefore function. But once the famine and the genocide charges and the global outrage came to the forefront, the contradictions then became unmanageable.
Geert Wilders is a psycho right-winger. Thank you, Jim. I thought that I recognised him. Something clicked inside saying, I recognise that person. So he's a nutter. Fantastic. Rejoice, comrades. Our resident philosopher, Scribby, has been here for 9 months. Hello. It seems to have went back over to phone mode, Scribby. Anyway. Yes, it is the Scripster. It's weird. No. And that is the screen capture. Carry on,
This was the
Demo.
coalition's original sin, an attempt to reconcile the irreconcilable, at a time when Israel and Gaza were guaranteed to dominate global politics. The very structure of the cabinet contained the seeds of its own destruction, therefore. The first rupture in the Schoof cabinet occurred back in June of this year. The immediate issue was not Israel at all, as it happens, but asylum policy, because this is where the far right love to sit on, isn't it? Wilders was frustrated that his demands for sweeping restrictions on immigration had not been met. so he pulled the PVV out of the coalition on the 3rd of June. And this move collapsed the government in formal terms. The PVV were the largest party, therefore turning the government into what they call a demissionary caretaker cabinet. King Willem Alexander even cut short a state visit to address this crisis at home, God forbid, heaven forfend. And snap elections have been called for the 29th of October this year. The June collapse exposed two critical truths, though. First is that Wilders was never a reliable partner. How could he possibly be with his political beliefs? His political strategy had always been to maximise disruption, not to sustain compromise. Second, the Schuff cabinet was already reduced to a weakened form long before Israel became the breaking point, therefore. By June, the government was operating on borrowed time, without a majority, and in the knowledge that elections were only months away. What was not yet clear in June was that Israel would soon provide the second and fatal rupture. The asylum dispute showed the coalition could not reconcile its domestic agendas. Wilders, the Islamophobe, could not be pacified. Gaza would show it could not reconcile its foreign policy either. At the same time, though, Gaza had become impossible to ignore nonetheless. International bodies had declared famine. The International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court were investigating allegations of genocide. The humanitarian situation was broadcast daily across global media and in social media. In this context, the Dutch government's refusal to sanction Israel, even as the government was being forced to wind up ahead of October elections, still became untenable. Schuff had nothing to sit on the fence over anymore. He had no reason to. Wilders was gone. He could have done the right thing with regards to Israel, and yet he still chose not to. Clearly, it's just not his own position either. Public opinion was already clear, though, and he wasn't paying any attention to that either. In April, an Ipsos INO survey revealed that support for the cabinet's Israel policy was falling. In May, an RTL poll found that 2/3 of Dutch respondents believed Israel's bombing of Gaza was out of all proportion, and 77% condemned its blockade of humanitarian aid. An earlier poll from October of last year had shown that 55% of the Dutch public wanted their government to be more critical of Israel, with only 6% wanting it to be more supportive. These figures pointed to a broad consensus in Dutch society that Israel's actions were unacceptable and that the Netherlands should take a stronger stance. And yet Schuff still refused. His line was consistent, but it was hollow. The Netherlands would not act alone, even though the EU couldn't act at all, and he knew this. Sanctions, if they were to be imposed, would have to be decided at the EU level, and he knew they would never come. They would be vetoed by the likes of Austria or Germany or Hungary. So this was not pragmatism, it was paralysis. EU unanimity rules on foreign policy meant sanctions were a political impossibility. By hiding behind Brussels, though, Schuff was committing the Netherlands to permanent inaction. For NSC, this was indefensible. Casper Veldkamp, as foreign minister, had pressed for sanctions, and when he was blocked, he chose to resign on the 22nd of August. His resignation letter made clear that he could not remain in a government that refused to act while famine raged in Gaza. His departure was soon followed by the withdrawal of all NSC ministers and state secretaries. The party declared that it would not be complicit in a government that refused to sanction Israel in the face of genocide. So this was the second collapse of the Schuff cabinet in 3 months, therefore. The first in June had been caused by Wilders leaving. The second in August was caused by NSC's refusal to remain silent over Gaza. The government was reduced to a rump of VVD and BBB, a caretaker in name, but a hollowed out entity in practice, limping on now until October 29th, as they surely will. The opposition have...
Thanks, John the Brazen. Brilliant, an Islamophobe. Are they the majority party? His one, Wilders. I hate the rise of the fucking far right. Hi, John. Rejoice, comrades. John the Brazen is here. Hi, John. Sorry about it being in phone mode. I don't know what's going on with Streamlabs. I've tried to fix it, but I don't know how I fixed it the last time this happened. It is rather annoying. No party has a majority. Oh, God, right. Netherlands, please do not vote for right-wing fucking Islamophobic nutters. I beg of you.
as a result, seized the moment. Katy Perry of Groenlink's PVDA described the government's refusal to sanction Israel as shameful. European media portrayed the Netherlands as a country paralysed by contradictions. Reports followed that the Israel sanctions debate had deepened political turmoil in The Hague. What was left was a government existing only in form. It had no capacity to act, no credibility at home, and no moral standing abroad. The Netherlands has long prided itself on pragmatic consensus politics, on the ability to
I am
govern through
losing your chat off my
compromise.
phone for a
But
second.
Gaza revealed that some issues just cannot be fudged. On famine and genocide, pragmatism becomes indistinguishable from complicity. Take a side. Look at what you're actually both siding here. The consequences of the August resignations are far-reaching, therefore, even though, actually, in terms of the survival of the government, they're academic. For NSC, the decision to walk out was an attempt at redemption. Having tarnished their reputation already by entering a government with Wilders in it in the first place, of all people, they now tried to reclaim the mantle of integrity by resigning on principle, and given it's Israel, it's a tough shout to criticise them for that. Veldkamp declared that he could not be complicit in silence, and whether voters will reward this stand, of course, remains to be seen, but it gave NSC a narrative to take forward into that October campaign now. For Schuff and the VVD, the damage is severe. Their fence-sitting has been exposed as cowardice. By hiding behind EU unanimity, they had committed the Netherlands to doing nothing about Israel, even as public opinion demanded something be done, demanded action. The government's stance satisfied absolutely no one. It alienated pro-Israel ideologues who wanted vocal support, and it alienated reformists who wanted sanctions. The result was weakness on every front. Abstention never pleases anybody. So for Wilders, the collapse was an opportunity. Having left in June, the PVV bore no responsibility for the paralysis of August. Wilders could posture as a defender of Israel and a critic of Schuff's incompetence. Polling suggests that his party remains the strongest single force heading into October, despite his avowed support for Israel, which is rather worrying and rather shameful. For GroenLinks PVDA, which is an alliance between the Dutch Green Party and their Labour Party, as that effectively is, the crisis is an absolute gift. Their platform was rooted in human rights and public opinion was with them. They positioned themselves as the only credible alternative, condemning the government's inaction as complicity in genocide. Having united their forces earlier in the year, they now had a clear issue to campaign on. The broader significance of these events is that Israel and Gaza have done far more damage to Dutch politics than initially apparent. What appeared to be a foreign policy dispute turned into a structural crisis of governance. The first dimension of this damage is structural. Israel became a coalition breaker for another state. It was impossible to reconcile PVV's unconditional support, VVD's permanent inaction, and NSC's demand for accountability. No coalition can function when its members hold such diametrically opposed positions on an issue as grave as famine and genocide. The second dimension is moral. Dutch politics has long prided itself on pragmatism, but Gaza exposed the limits of this tradition. Pragmatism cannot mean permanent complicity. A government that refuses to act in the face of famine is not pragmatic, it's morally bankrupt. And the third dimension is identity. Wilders used Israel as a proxy for his domestic anti-Muslim politics. Gaza became not just a foreign policy issue, but a symbol of identity politics within the Netherlands. For NSC, Israel was a test of its integrity. For VVD, it was an excuse to do nothing. Israel thus reshaped Dutch politics from within, creating divisions that could not be bridged. As the Netherlands approaches those October elections now, therefore, the legacy of these events is clear. The election will not be fought only on asylum policy or on technocratic competence or anything like that. It's actually going to end up being a referendum on Israel and Gaza. And if PVV still emerges dominant, those polls on Israel and Gaza in the Netherlands would, I think, in that event have observers asking, what are you thinking? Israel will have a vocal defender in Dutch politics. If GroenLinks PVDA gains strength, the Netherlands may pivot towards those sanctions and accountability. If VVD tries to hold the centre, it will struggle to explain why it chose inaction while famine unfolded. And if NSC survives, it will be because voters believed that resigning in August was a principled act, not a belated attempt to save face. But the coalition arithmetic is now harder than ever. The irreconcilable positions on Israel mean the old majority formulas no longer work there. Any future government will have to take a clearer stance on Israel one way or the other. The collapse of the Schuff cabinet illustrates how the refusal to sanction Israel has torn through Dutch politics and is a lesson for other nations now too, who are sitting on their hands in defiance of the will of the people. What began as an impossible triangle of ideologies, from Wilders' devoutly pro-Israel racism to Schuff's hollow pragmatism to the NSC's reformist conscience was destined to implode once Gaza became the defining moral crisis of Europe. In June, Wilders walked away. In August, Casper Veldkamp and the NSC could no longer stomach complicity and resigned too. What remains is a ghost government, in effect, staggering on paper but dead in spirit, limping towards October. The lesson's a brutal one. Pragmatism in the face of famine and genocide is not neutrality. Other nations need to learn from what is happening here. It's a moral abdication, after all. It's complicity dressed up as caution. By refusing to sanction Israel, Dick Schuff chose paralysis, and in doing so he detonated the very stability he claimed to defend. And he may well be punished heavily for it at the polls come October. The reckoning is not finished, of course. That October election will decide whether the Netherlands cements its reputation as a state willing to look away from war crimes, or whether it finally breaks with complicity and confronts Israel's actions head on. Schuff's government may already be dead, but the larger question remains unresolved. Will Dutch democracy redeem itself? Or will history remember this moment as the time the Netherlands chose silence in the face of genocide, even as they tried to take action? So in light of all of this, it's a real wonder the Netherlands ever managed to get it voted through that Israel was now officially a national security threat in the Netherlands. Yet a threat it very much is. They did achieve this. It was a win for the NSC and Casper Veldkamp. So get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the very same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.
Hmm. Yeah, they like Demo here. Demo is amazing and is doing amazing work. I don't know what the studio mode. Hmm. Hmm. Let's see if this works. I will end the stream and bring it back to see if that actually fixes it. Give me a couple of minutes, please.